Welcome to ISEE AWPC Career and Research Talk webinar. Please let us know if you can hear me. If you can kindly just text in the chat box, that would be great. I'm Xiao, and I'm your host today. I'm an executive counselor and the chair of the education subcommittee at ISEE AWPC. I'm an associate professor in urban health and environment at UNSW Sydney, Australia. Before we start the webinar, I would like to show my respects and acknowledge the bountiful people who are the traditional custodians of the land of elders past, present, and emerging on which this meeting takes place, Kensington, Sydney. The aim of the Career and Research Talks is to regularly connect ISEE AWPC members and inspire early and mid-career researchers in environmental epidemiology. I would like to thank for my colleagues and ISEE AWPC executive counselors, Julie, Asuku, Xiaowei, and Weiji's support. Please follow us via Twitter, ISEE AWPC, and the website for forthcoming events. If you would like to provide feedback or nominate speakers, please email me, xiaoqi.unsw.edu.au. Okay, great. I can see people say you can hear me. That's fantastic. Thank you. So today we have guest speaker, Dr. Marco MARTUZZI. Okay, we seem to have a little bit connection issue. Just let's wait for a second. Okay, there is a bit. Okay, event will continue in a second. Sorry, I think there was a little bit connection issue. So hopefully everyone's still online. That's just the video conference issue, but hopefully we're all back now. So today we have guest speaker, Dr. Marco MARTUZZI, with us talking about his career path and presenting making environmental epidemiology research most policy relevant. Marco MARTUZZI, the head of the Asia Pacific Center for Environment and Health of the World Health Organization, Regional Office for the Western Pacific. He is an epidemiologist with experience in environmental and occupation studies. Today's seminar has 3 parts. In the first 20 to 30 minutes, I will have a chat with Marco about his career journey. Then Marco will give a short presentation. Audience members can ask questions by typing in the Q&A chat window, and I will read out your questions to Marco for him to answer after his presentation. Welcome, Marco.
Thank you. Good to see you, and thank everybody who connects.
Thank you, Marco. So Marco, I'm wondering, did you always know that you wanted to work at the WHO, the WHO?
Sorry, say again. I have a bad
Sure, yes. I'm wondering, did you always know that you wanted to work at the WHO, the WHO?
Did I always know it? Well, not sure. When I started my career in public health, certainly WHO was, one of the important reference points, one of the entities I think everybody looks at in public health. And certainly I was very interested, and as soon as the opportunity came up, I tried to make the most of it, and I joined. So it came rather early, but I couldn't say that I knew it from the beginning, no.
Okay, right. So I'm just wondering, what your career path before the WHO, why you decide to join a different career, I guess, in WHO. What attracted you? It would be great if you can share with us a little bit.
Yes, sure. I mean, I started working in the Italian National Institute of Health very briefly. It was the very early 90s. And just to put the things in context, at that time, email did not exist. If you put it's not easy for young people and early research colleagues. Email did not exist. The web did not exist, in fact. In any case, I started there very shortly in Rome. I'm from Italy, so the institute is in Rome. Shortly afterwards, I moved to London, London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, where there was a position as a research fellow, and I was there for 4 or 5 years. And during that time, while working as a research fellow, I also took a PhD. And it was then, towards the, it was 96, that I saw there was an opportunity in IARC, the International Agency for Research on Cancer, in Lyon, in France, which is an agency of WHO. And I applied for this position and obtained it, and very happily moved and joined WHO for what has been by now a long time with the agency.
Great. Well, thank you. And I'm sure, although the old days we don't have emails, and probably we couldn't have what we had today, having today. But I'm also think probably less stressed, and we are waiting for letters rather than flooded emails. So Marco, I think you mentioned that you did a PhD in London. I'm just wondering, did you have any earlier influencers or role models when you were maybe a PhD student or when you were postdoc?
Oh yes, definitely, quite a few, and it's even difficult to mention some without leaving out others. Certainly, at the very beginning, my first mentor, Dr. Pietro Comba from the National Institute of Health in Rome, he's been one of my main reference person. In London, I recall working with very clever people. Some of them are still around, like my long-term boss at the time, Professor Paul Elliott, but also people like Michael Hills or Tony McMichael. I mean, I'm sure that many of you will know the name. Tony was around the School of Hygiene in those years, and indeed, yeah, I mean, Tony, among many others, was a kind of outstanding person, both professionally and on the human profile, and it really made, I think, a big difference in my career, but also in my way of thinking and seeing the world, I should say.
Great, thank you very much, Marco, and to share with us. And actually, I'm quite curious about the organization currently you're working on. Can you tell us a little bit about the whole regional office for the Western Pacific, and also your role? And also wondering, you have been to several countries and also worked in Germany when you were with WHO. So how different is it to working in a university and also in a research institute? I think probably a lot of audience today, they are working in the university or research institute, never have worked with WHO. So it would be great if you can let us know a little bit your current office and also a little bit your experience. Tell us a bit difference or maybe similarities as well. Thank you.
Right, yes, of course. This office, the Asia Pacific Center for Environment and Health, is part of the Western Pacific regional office of WHO. Now, WHO is a UN agency. The headquarters are in Geneva, and there are several regional offices throughout the world. This one, the Western Pacific, the head office of the Western Pacific is in Manila, the Philippines. And here in Seoul, we are a so-called geographically dispersed technical office. So it's a specialized office. So it's a piece of WIPRO, the Western Pacific region, where we cover climate change, environment, and health. It's a similar setup as we have in the European office of WHO. So the European Center for Environment and Health is based in Bonn, Germany, and is part of the European region, which is based in Copenhagen. So these offices essentially are specialized. They take advantage of additional support from host countries, like here in Korea, the same as in Germany, to cover, in both cases, in fact, in Bonn and in Seoul, environment and health. In Europe, there are other specialized offices, geographically dispersed. So it's a model that has been around for a few years. This center is relatively new. It's been in existence for a year and a half. But you know, in other cases, these offices have been existing for many years, in fact. So you asked about the difference between working in WHO and in research, and of course, yes, it's a lot of differences. Essentially, the setup and the mandate is different. WHO is the UN agency whose constituencies are the ministries of health. So we respond and report to national governments through the ministries of health. In our case, we also have a very close relationship with the Ministry of Environment. But of course, I mean, it's still governments that we interface with. Whereas, of course, research, I'm talking of the School of Hygiene, which is part of the University of London, is fully part of the academia. So it's although, you know, many activities are similar and there's a lot of overlap and, of course, collaboration, ultimately the flavor and the ultimate mandate and role in society, let's say, is different.
Oh, I just find that I mute myself, and I already see that there are people start to ask questions. I had a quick look. I think they're all very interesting questions because I have similar questions for you. But it's really great to know that there's a new regional office where you're based and you're also the head of the office, and looking about the climate and the health and environment. I think this is really fantastic, especially in the Asia and Western Pacific, this region. I'm just wondering, what does a normal working day look like for you, and has it been different during COVID?
Yes, very much so. I think it's everybody's experience that our working days in the last almost year now have been very stationary, very much in the office, with a lot of these online exchanges. And everybody, I think it's everybody's experience that there's a lot of advantages and disadvantages. I mean, the advantage is efficiency. We are able to have more interactions, and by now I think everybody is fully used to having this kind of relationship and collaboration, remote collaboration. I think by now we are all very fluent in using these platforms like today, or I was most of the day on a Zoom meeting. So my working day after COVID has been very much like this. We also have a face-to-face interaction here in the office. It's still a small group, but of course we have lots of discussions among ourselves. I've had quite a bit of interactions also face-to-face with several colleagues in Seoul mainly, in Korea. So that's been the typical working day recently, and of course a lot of email, a lot of track changes in Word. I think everybody's, or many people are familiar with that too. This sort of work. Before COVID, well, there was a lot of more face-to-face activities, meetings on-site and off-site. I want to mention also the fact that one of the last biggish events I attended before COVID was the conference of the ISEE Asia Pacific, Asia, I think it was still called, chapter in Daegu in Korea, which is very nice, very vibrant conference. I was impressed because I didn't expect a regional chapter to be so big and so rich. Yes, before COVID, that was very much part of my daily life, but of course, many of those, and ISEE conferences as well. I've been attending them, not every year, of course, but again, since the early 90s, and it was always one of the highlights of the year.
Thank you. I agree with you because I also attended some previous ISEE chapters conference as well, and I think the Korea one last year that my PhD student was there and he really enjoyed it. And hopefully that in your busy life that you are able to find a bit time to enjoy some nice Korean food.
Absolutely, yes. I have to say that I really like life here in Seoul. For me it was I changed many places, but always in Europe until last year. And coming here was, of course, a bit of a question mark. I knew what to expect, but of course I was not sure how it would play out. But it's been great. I really like it here, and although it's been difficult because traveling back to see the family is complicated these days, but I like it here. It's food and the rest of it. It's been a very nice experience.
Thank you, Marco, and I think that's really encouraging, and because I think it's really important, probably for earlier career researchers to have some international working experience. And it's great to hear your experience, especially working in Europe for a very long time and now move to Asia, and you find that the life here is just as interesting, probably more as you said than expected. So I'm wondering, what are some of the things you have found the most rewarding in your role?
Well, I think, inevitably, it's very rewarding when you see other people engaging and responding to your suggestions. And that could apply at various levels. It could apply to junior staff that you try to guide. It can apply to counterparts and collaborators in external agencies engaging and the mutual learning. I think it's always great, and it can be very much on technical issues, but it can also be at the level of communication and more general type of interaction and collaboration. So I think, I think that's certainly one of the first things that spring to mind, talking of rewarding. Of course, completing also the completion of some nice piece of work, an assessment, a paper, a publication, the making of a product can be very, very rewarding. And again, that's especially true, I would say, when the product is the result of a collaborative effort.
Thank you, Marco. And I think this is also mentioned by our last guest speaker, Professor Mark Newman-Huizen as well, that the collaboration domestically but also internationally is very important. So I'm wondering, how has your work experience in the whole in South Korea and Germany, as well as your research experience, in the UK and France that you mentioned, shaped your outlook on environmental epidemiology?
Well, of course, I mean, my outlook in environmental epidemiology is the result of this trajectory, which I think it's a bit common. I mean, maybe I hang out with people of my own kind, but I see that I and other people I can think of you start working in a rather technically defined domain, where you drill down in some rather specialized area. You learn some very technically rich skills. You follow your teachers, and you spend time studying and practicing some skills. So you're very focused on some. At least I was very focused on some specific areas. And then, with WHO, as I mentioned, the ultimate goal of WHO is supporting member states, countries, ministries. So you have to broaden you try to understand very well the context, and I'll come to that in my talk later, because really it's about the policy relevance of this work. So for me, it's a process of broadening my views, trying to understand better the context, the implications, the use of this research, and to, also an attraction, so to speak, of being near the action where these decisions are eventually made. So I guess, from research to WHO, and WHO, we don't do research as such, but we remain very close in certain parts of WHO, for sure, very close. We have some spaces where we do something which is similar to research, in some cases also some assessments and so on. So the context gains a lot of importance and attention, and yeah, someone like myself, I spend quite a lot of time in that compartment.
Great, thank you. I'm very interested about your view, as an environmental epidemiologist, have been in the field for quite a while. How do you see the environmental epidemiology evolving over the next 10 years? I asked Mark this question too, but I want to hear from you too. Thank you.
Yeah, I followed Mark's session with interest. And of course, I can relate a lot to what he said as well. And it's a difficult question, but of course, it's. I think it's the most evident factor there is both the how challenging the changes we are seeing are, and I'm referring to climate change, for example, and climate change is actually one aspect of a bigger problem of environmental deterioration, and there's a number of
I think, Marco, you just accidentally muted yourself. Okay, you're back. Sorry.
Right.
Yeah.
So climate change is one of the several planetary boundaries that we are trespassing. Some of them we know, some others we don't. Think of biodiversity, think of the natural cycles, oceans, and COVID-19 that is not born as an environmental problem, but many of us think that the environment has a lot to do with it. We've been messing around with land use and natural habitats, and I think we made it easier for viruses to jump to the human species. So I think in the coming 10 years, that aspect should become more and more prominent. We should ensure that the bulk of the science that environmental epidemiology produces is focused to this to these very big problems, and we divert some energy from, for example, over polishing the stone of certain research areas to look at these big problems. So I think that's where we're going, and also going in a direction where we don't have much of, we don't have, it's something we don't know. We cannot really look back and estimate what happened and project in the future, because it's all new, and we have to play along and to govern this very complicated process. At the same time, we have good ammunitions for doing that, because a lot of fantastic new methods and instruments and tools and awareness has been emerging. So we do have a good armory of good methods for approaching this complicated time ahead.
Great. Thank you, Marco. I like what you just said. I also agree with you that I think there are going to be a lot of new things that in our field we haven't think about it or based on our current knowledge, but it will happen because everything is changing in the world. So I'm wondering, could you, just think about if you could speak to yourself when you were an early to mid-career researcher, knowing all that you do now, and what advices would you give to yourself?
Right, this is a difficult question. I was thinking about it, and I think I would probably give myself the advice of investing a bit more of my time and energy to more learning. It's easy to be carried away by what you're doing, your daily tasks and your deadlines. It's also kind of comforting, I guess, to tick your boxes, daily and feel accomplished. But that can come at the expenses of maybe finding some more space for yourself to think, to read, and to study things that are not maybe so visibly directly connected to your line of work, but they might turn out to be useful. So I think I would like to, yes, I wish I had done more of that in previous years, because yeah, many things ultimately turn out to, many things you study and learn ultimately turn out to make you a better scientist, I think, a better judge of your own area of work.
Great. Thank you. Actually, that's my last question. I think we really need to move on to the questions from our audience. There's quite a few in the queue. Okay, right. I will read that for you, Marco. So we have Audience Anonymous said, I'm wondering how Marco feels the internet, email, and now social media have influenced the development of environmental epidemiology and its impact on society.
Well, that's a very big question. I often wonder about that. I mean, it's even hard for thinking back of my early days. No email, computers. We had a PC. We took turns in the office to use it. So can you imagine, the process of submitting a paper to a journal? What it was. I mean, it was snail mail and photocopies, and getting mail back for peer reviews. It's another world, and now with social media and now with remote work that we do so much, these are sort of big revolutions, and inevitably the way of working changes, and inevitably I think the quality of what comes out of it changes. And I think I don't have an answer. I don't know how, but I think it changes inevitably. And I wish that someone invested more time and some serious meta study, studying how this impact is in reality. It's another, these big transformations happen, and we don't. I mean, I for one, it's gradual. You don't pay too much attention. Another one that took place, and it's massive, is the evolution of the editing, the publishing world. Nowadays, we all see how it works with the proliferation of journals, the mechanism of financing, publishing, the open access, and you know that we are all, I think, bombarded by these emails wanting us to publish for them. So that changes really overnight, not overnight, gradually, but radically. And yes, I think it's more as maybe a sociological type of analysis, but it's big changes for sure.
Sure. Thank you, Marco. I can see there's still a lot of questions, which we will hopefully go through all of them. But I think I'll probably should over to you, Marco, to learn about making environmental epidemiology research most policy relevant. Over to you. Let me get this right. Okay.
All right. Are the slides visible now?
Yes, ready.
Okay.
If you could tell us a bit more about it, that would be great. Thank you.
Good, right. Thank you very much. And once again, thank you for the invitation. I didn't say that so at the beginning, but it's great. Thank you, XIAO, for organizing this, and your colleagues in the chapter, and to ISEE, which has been, as I mentioned, for, I don't know, 25, maybe 30 years, my professional society of reference. So it's great. And after what I said, you understand, I think, why I focus on this particular topic. And this is because our center here, we said already several of these things, and I don't need to repeat them, but it's about supporting countries, the 37 countries of WIPRO, by the way. And just to give you an idea where we are, this is the bottom right is a picture of where we are in Seoul, a beautiful central area of town. At the moment, it's still a small office with 6 fixed on-site staff, several staff consultants operating from out of the office, and several people around, temporarily visitors and other colleagues based here for different reasons. So this is where we are. And we build on a rather solid basis in WHO when it comes to climate change, environment, and health. There's been a lot of work both at global level and at regional level. We have this very solid foundations, I would say, of the Sustainable Development Goals that underpins all the work of the UN system in the domain. So we are, I think, in a very good shape when it comes to implementing some concrete work. In WIPRO, we also have a very, very nice foundation in this for the future, which is the vision for public health in WIPRO for the current 5 years, where which I invite you to read. It's really a nice document. Climate change, environment, and health is climate change and environment is one of the 4 priorities of the region, and there are some so-called operational shifts. So the how to do work, and it's very forward-looking. I think it talks about innovation, backcasting, strategic communications. There's a number of hows discussed, and setting the scene on how it is for WHO WIPRO to work on these topics, including climate change and environment. So I think we are in a very favorable situation. So you see why I'm so keen on making research policy relevant, because I come from that world, and I really want to see environmental epidemiology research relevant. It's a bit difficult to define. In my experience, some of the policy questions can be very difficult to deal with. Sometimes they are too generic and almost untreatable. I remember in the past, one question was, what's the health impact of waste, and what does it mean? It's really difficult. Or sometimes other times, they come at a moment when it's almost untouchable. Should we ban glyphosate? It's kind of thing. It comes too late. It's already a war that you don't want to take sides on, for example. So in the end, I would say that relevant evidence is the one that gets used. It can be good evidence, bad evidence for research. And if you're sitting on good research and it's not used, then someone else uses their own maybe not so good research. Too bad. I mean, it's a missed opportunity. So I think it's really important to try and make good research and produce good evidence and have it used to the extent possible in the policy world. Now, you might have come across this way of formulating the issue, where you have policy question and you have to come to a decision, and there is the distinction between the risk management sphere, marked in blue, and the risk assessment sphere, the science sphere, here in green, and it can be structured in a different way. This looks very rational and kind of attractive, but one thing, for making one message I want to convey is it doesn't work. It's really a way that, although attractive and appealing, logically appealing, it doesn't reflect reality. Things don't work like that, and so many ways that in which this scheme is essentially wrong. Starting from framing, where does the question come from? Who's asking it, and missing the political context is so important. How do you deal with uncertainty, which is a fact? I mean, a fact of life these days in these assessments. Crucially, this scheme tends to break down a problem into separate components, different chemicals or agents. Part of the again, think of the waste example. And you miss the complex nature of the problem. You look at one aspect, and it's so partial to become insignificant, irrelevant. Then issue of legitimacy. If good quality assessment is done behind closed doors, it will be difficult for the final decision maker or community to accept it, because there's an issue of some people call it pedigree of evidence and trust and legitimacy. And again, who is to say whether, after all, the decision is consistent with this evaluation? So there are many ways in which this schematization is not correct. If you look inside the technical part, I want to mention a very nice paper that I invite you to read by Rodolfo Saracchi, another person that I could mention as one of the mentors. About the title also is, I think, very nice, The Hazards of Hazard Identification. And there are several distorting factors that Rodolfo talks about in hazard identification. The paper has to do a little bit with glyphosate and climate change. In the end, the point is that this process of hazard identification essentially depends on judgment. And this is, I think, a very crucial point. what we do in science and environmental epidemiology is not value-free. It's not facts. It's facts filtered and processed through our own values. Think of using the 5% statistical significance level or the 95% confidence intervals. That's an arbitrary choice. If you are more sophisticated than that and you do Bayesian modeling, you will need to choose a prior, and if you click the button of default prior, which is sort of vague or whatever it is, the distribution, again, it's a choice which is, it's your own value-rich choice. And so the same applies when you extrapolate risks out of the observed range, if you go linear or non-linear, whatever. When you don't have enough data to look at interactions, for example, and you stick to the proportional hazard assumption, which is, I think, inevitable, but it carries some it's a value judgment or implicit. You don't judge it, but you make a choice that has some values attached. And many other reasons why we cannot claim to do facts only. And think of, as an example of that, I used to work in IARC for many years, and when the assessment is done, the evaluation of carcinogens, there's very often a vote for experts, and these are top-level international experts to vote agents in different classes of carcinogenicity. And the very fact there's a vote reflects its value. It's a choice between different views of the same body of evidence, which is thoroughly reviewed and thoroughly shared and put on the table. And some people say sufficient evidence, and the others say something else, inadequate or whatever. So it's values are everywhere. And I want to mention a few things that I essentially learned in our work in areas of environmental epidemiology that are not so maybe familiar to everybody, but health impact assessment. We did years ago work on using the precautionary principle, and there is some nice literature, for example, on post-normal science that talks about situations where facts are uncertain, stakes high, values in dispute, and decisions urgent. And out of this experience and literature, I pulled out a number of items that I certainly don't have time to go through one by one, but I want to maybe stop on a couple of them to really make my point, and these would be my recommendation or my plea to how to make your research more policy relevant. So try to move, for example, from working and thinking of linear systems like risk factor X, outcome Y. And again, it's this analytic approach that breaks down bigger problems in big problems into maybe components, and to consider the complex system to the extent possible. I know it's difficult, but again, the literature in that has been growing. And very often these systems are more than the sum, by definition actually, they are more of the sum of their parts. So by looking at pieces, you miss something important. Maybe I could also mention the fact that we all like working using rigorous methodology, elegant science, but sometimes you have to accept that you might need to operate in imperfection, and this terminology comes from the post-normal science literature, and I think it's very important. And when I mentioned earlier legitimacy and of the final recommendation, and sometimes to ensure legitimacy, you need to work in imperfection. if you look at the second last line here, these categories of sufficient evidence or conclusive or significant, we often in epidemiology they're made in a vacuum, but really sufficient and conclusive is dependent of for what. If it's, I don't know, occupational standards, or if it's levels of contamination for families or for children, the sufficient would change. You consider maybe sufficient evidence a much lower level when it comes to vulnerable populations than when it is for other settings. So the consideration of what this evidence is eventually used for is important. And so all of this is to say that objectivity, although yes, we would like, of course, to be objective, but it's a bit of an elusive concept because of all these values that go into the work. So I think it's more realistic or profitable, perhaps, to pursue impartiality, to be sure that you don't have biased or even in some cases even hidden agendas. I mean, it's really, or rather, be impartial to public health rather than to any other question. So these would be things, and there are more. I don't have time to go through them, to pursue, to try to make research more policy relevant, and several other things. One, maybe not, it's not about changing much, but to keep in mind, to be aware of the fact that in this type of epidemiology, there are also, if you're attached to your role as expert and you see the others as stakeholders, well, that role might be questioned. I mean, you might be, become part of some people call it community of peers. It's a more participatory type of approach. And to finish with the last line, I think it's important to recognize that the world of environmental epidemiology is designed in a way where we tend to penalize more heavily false positives as opposed to false negatives. It's better for many of us to maybe publish a study where you don't detect a small effect rather than publishing a study where you come up with a positive finding that is later contradicted. So I think it's in a sense natural that is the case, but one should be aware of this kind of attitude in science, and be prepared to recognize that in some cases maybe low specificity and high, the opposite might be appropriate. So to finish, all of this is really the implication of all of this is that we need more and better environmental epidemiology. More research is needed, and that's often a conclusion of the studies, and I really think it's really more research and better research is needed. And I want to mention the one event that took place last September in WIPRO. We organized the first innovation forum on WIPRO. You remember I mentioned innovation as one of the keywords in this vision for the future that the office is based on. And we had a session in this very nice online event, of course, on climate change and environment. And these are some of the topics that came up and attracted a lot of interest. And some of them, actually all of them, I'm sure you will recognize as very familiar in the domain. from broad like communication and participation to highly specific exposome research, exposomics, is really gaining a lot of traction and attention. Urban health, we heard a very nice talk by Mark in the previous meeting, and that's a very, very promising topic. And this idea of systems thinking came up again, and I think I'm very keen on that. I think we should really invest in that area as one of the most important to address these big challenges that are in front of us. And again, trying to embrace the whole package from molecules to population and the planet, as someone in this event put it, because really we need nothing less than that, and that's a very, very demanding and ambitious agenda. Therefore, the efforts and the brains of the people like the young or less young members of ISEE, of this chapter, and of course all the rest of the society and beyond are badly needed. So with that, I think I'll stop. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Marco. And I really like your presentation, especially talking about the policy. I think a lot of time when we conduct the research, and we may not think about how this maybe could translate or provide evidence to the policy, and then how we can communicate with the policymakers, not only just orally, but also how then our work can be useful to making hopefully the right policy and change the world better. So I think we should continue some of the questions from our audience. We still have a nice about 20 minutes, and so I hope that today we can go through all the questions we have so far. But to the audience, and if you have more questions, please type in your chat box. You could use your name, or you can anonymous questions as well. So we have questions here from Julie and another audience, but I think they ask more or less similar, so I'm going to combine it together. They ask you, Marco, what is the mission and the scope work of this new central office that you are leading? And also, what are your expectations?
Well, as I mentioned, the mission is really to support our member states, the 37 countries, in dealing with climate change, environment, and health. And we have a wide variety of countries with very different everything, from the small islands in the Pacific that are already feeling they've been already feeling the climate change impact for quite some time, and they're essentially going underwater. So it's really climate change hitting very hard. To the countries in continental Asia with massive problems of, air pollution. So the mission is to support all countries in their efforts in that domain. And in fact, our initial setup here is to work on climate change, air pollution, water and sanitation, because again, water and sanitation is a bit of a perennial problem in the area, which is remains a very important issue, and supporting countries in their efforts in many ways, providing the evidence, supporting specific activities and projects and assessments, building capacities, and collaborations and so on.
Great. Thank you, Marco. And Julie Wang, actually, she's our president of the ISEE from next year. So Julie Wang also asked you that how would you think about the environmental management? Any suggestions to the researchers and policymakers, particularly in Asia and the Western Pacific areas?
Yeah, it's a very good question. Environmental management, it's something that brings us out of our certainly our comfort zone, in many cases also out of our competence. And yes, I think it's something we should do, and it's a typical situation, I would say, an example where you have to rely on multidisciplinary efforts, and there's no escape from addressing an issue like environmental management through a collaboration with a number of expertise. If you think of I don't know, land use management or forestry or fisheries, a lot of work, of course, occurs in those domains. The important thing is to try and push for more active and meaningful involvement of health, the health community, because in many cases the health considerations are ignored, or maybe just a box to tick. The work that we've been doing for many years in health in environmental impact assessment has gone a long way in that sort of reasoning, and environmental management is certainly a very important chapter in that respect.
Thank you, Marco. Thomas Estelberg from Australia asks you, really interesting talk, Marco. Can you tell us more about your role as a leader and the structure of your center in the WHO, please?
Yeah, it's as I mentioned, the center is part of WIPRO as integral part. My role as a leader, well, I came to Seoul last year in October, and we had to open the office. So many months since have been spent in opening the physical space here. We have a very nice office space, which had to be created from scratch to get some staff and get the things in motion. And it's a very lengthy process, so my role has been for many months essentially that. More recently, we've been we have moved into producing some results. For now, we're still sort of building them. We've been working on areas like monitoring the impact of climate change, or reviewing the latest evidence in air pollution in the region. So my role as a leader here, it's a small group, so it's a center sounds like a big thing, but for now it's like a unit, so to speak. And of course we do that in very close daily contact with other parts of WHO first, WHO WIPRO and beyond, and also with several partners out of WHO, including the WHO collaborating centers. And there's quite a few of them in the region and they're very great help that they've been, support that they've been. So it's great partners and collaborators.
Great. So we have a question for you here. Is that what can members of the ISEE AWPC and researchers more generally do to support Marco, you, achieve your center's goal or goals?
It's a great question, because of course it sounds like there's the interest of doing so. That's great. And being part of this meeting today is already, I think, important. You know about us and now what we try to do. if some of these points of how to make your research more policy relevant resonate with you, let us know. I mean, contact me, and we can certainly find ways of getting some of the results you're producing, making them, first of all, knowing about them and seeing how this research can be used for in our work with the countries. So indeed, it's about not establishing a dialogue, because a dialogue is already happening, but reinforcing it and finding more concrete ways of collaborating.
Thank you. Looking forward for collaborating, I guess, everyone who is in the audience. We have this question saying, any suggestion for someone who is planning a career change into epidemiology or biostats from a medical field? How can we keep in touch with our medical field while pursuing a career in biostatistics? Interesting question.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure. I mean, it's probably also a bit country dependent. I'm not so familiar with this kind of educational mechanisms in different countries. I think, I mean, nowadays there's so much flow of communication, and before COVID, of course, there was also a lot of opportunities for physical deployment. WHO, for example, runs internships or other way, formats for visiting periods. So I know I'm not at all a great social media person, but there's so much going on there that even these virtual communities, I think, can be very profitable. And certainly we do need people, maintaining links with the medical profession and let's say the environmental epidemiology world. We need, in many cases, to advocate for environmental health determinants with the health community. In my experience, it's a bit of a classic that very good colleagues in the clinical setting, for example, they're not very familiar with the I don't know, the climate change related health determinants or the role of air pollution. So there's a lot to do and to promote and to convince in some cases, and vice versa, to learn from these other communities. So now, this proliferation of virtual contacts, I have an impression that results in an increased volume of exchanges. Not sure about the quality. Sometimes it might be a little low, and one should be very careful with the challenge is really to find where the most precious information is flowing, but there is a lot of it, and the volume is increased, and certainly there's plenty of opportunities.
Thank you, Marco. I also like your positive thinking about what we are experiencing now. So there's someone asked, say, thank you, Marco. You suggested need for more and better environment epidemiology. What are your suggestions to emerging researchers who seek to work in environmental epidemiology? So they are looking to work in epidemiology, environmental epidemiology for the earlier career researchers. Yeah. So what would be your advices?
Well, my advice would be to invest some time and energy in reading or getting someone to tell you about these things that for me are so much in need. I mentioned systems thinking, which, for example, is an area where my impression is that it's definitely something we need, and you hear a lot of people saying that we need, talking of urban health or climate change, we need to embrace the complexity of these systems. We cannot do things, public health measures looking at one factor. And I think there's a very broad agreement on that. It's impossible to disagree, in fact. But at the same time, I think we are a little short of concrete, things, methods and tools for people to use. So I think there's a big space for more research, including like methodological research. So what people can do is study system thinking, and there are, by the way, very good papers on systems thinking in public health, including some environmental with environmental examples. I mentioned exposomics, and that's another very very stimulating area where again, it's something that tries to capture the complexity of multiple environmental stresses falling on the same person, and looking at the life course, what happens as a result of environmental exposures since conception onwards, which of course is a phenomenally complex question. Which requires very, very skilled scientists and skilled methods. But the things has been, the topic has been moving. So what anyone can do is really spend time and it's hard literature, but try to approach it and learn from it. And talk to the researchers that are leading in this domain and so on.
Thank you, Marco. And we still have very many few to go, the questions, because people are really interested to hear your thoughts. This question is very interesting from my view, Marco. This participant asks you, I'm interested in what Marco thinks about funding of environmental epidemiology research. Just a couple of days ago, Professor Hoyip Fromkin called for a National Institute of Climate Change and Health, saying that just $9 million is spent per year in the US on climate change and health, from a total NIH budget of $40 billion. In other countries, it's probably much worse. How do we get some funding for the important research that need to be done? Do you have money?
Well, yes, I of course I don't know the answer, and I see the frustration of these kind of disproportions. I don't know about the US, but I mean it's a classic, isn't it, that we see this big disproportion between the amount of investment in prevention compared to what healthcare costs, and it's been demonstrated over and over again that $1 spent in prevention will save you, I don't know how many, but many more dollars later in other for healthcare or other outcomes. I can maybe refer to some experience before coming here in the European region. There was a very nice initiative by the European Commission that funded projects on setting the research agenda in general, and environment and health in particular. And the EU research budget is a very rich one. I can't remember, it's like several billions. It's a lot of money. And that was, I think, a good moment where the environment and health community was given a say on this allocation in a structured way. So there was, I think, a project still running, and among others, on finding a sort of organic way of identifying priorities. So I don't know. I mean, that's a good example. In my experience, it was a rather innovative thing, and we were, of course, very supportive of it. Again, it was heavily linked to the societal needs. The point was to ensure that it's not research for research, but it's research that maximizes the societal value. And again, the question of what's relevant and what's not was very much at the center of this project in its early stages, because I was part of it, but then I moved. But lots of very influential groups were involved, and yeah, that was a good example, I would say. But the answer to the question is frankly, I don't know.
No worries. Thanks for sharing with us some of your thought. So we have Suki Araki from Japan. She's also our executive counselor in ISEE AWPC chapter. So Suki said, "Thank you very much, Marco, for your nice talk. Do you find any specific environmental challenges in Asia and the Pacific regions?"
Yeah, thank you for the question, Suki. Nice to hear from you. Yes, of course. I mean, there's many things that are of global concern, but some are specific. I mentioned the Pacific Islands, for example, where climate change is so dramatically present in extreme weather events, in the vulnerability of health systems, in the disruption of people's daily life, in the damage done to food production. It's really the damage to coastal areas. That's very peculiar of the Pacific Islands. Not exclusive to that, but it's so strong and common across those countries that it's rather striking. The big cities, I mean, cities are of great interest, and one you might have seen the statistics that show that the proportion of globally, the proportion of people living in cities has been increasing massively. It's projected to increase like mad. But if you break down by continents, you will see that the biggest share of that by far, I mean, it's really the bulk of that trend is in Asian cities. So again, this notion, this area of urban environment gets a very special meaning and importance in Asia. Could also mention, I don't know, the haze episodes, pollution, air pollution from for example, agricultural big-scale burning. That's not exclusive to the region, but also rather a very strong case in Southern Asia particularly. So yes, there are several specific areas of work, yes.
Great. Thank you, Marco. I'm looking forward to hear more from you, after you're working in Asia and more. And I do agree with you about the big urbanization and happening in Asia Pacific area. I mean, even Australia now have more than ever large population than before. So we also have, I hope I pronounce your name correctly. I think it's called Rahil Kitima, also I think from Japan, ask you, thank you for a great presentation. From the environmental scientist perspective, what can be done to bridge the gap with policymakers in making our researchers more policy relevant? So, what needs to be done?
Yes, well, as I tried to say in my talk, and I understand, I mean, it's I kept it short. I see, some important step is to look how the policy questions are generated, where they come from, who raises them, and try to see the difference, the process between the way in which a question first comes up, a question of priority, or it could be, some press, some big news, big item in the news, and the way it gradually becomes or should become a question for research. Trying to see how that process plays out. I think it's very important, and not to break down big questions into small independent assessments, or maybe sometimes it's necessary, but then try to recompose the full picture at some point. And in practice, I think for people working, for example, in academia, try to promote more contacts and occasions for discussion with the outer sphere, where the policy making happens. Another, I think you will have all heard of citizen science, the kind of participatory processes that are becoming more and more common, and that's great. I know it's hard work. I mean, it's and it takes a kind of attitude that is not very often taught in our curricula, but there's a lot of value in those exercises too, and this in this for the future vision that I mentioned, some of these operational shifts talk about, there's one is called grounds up. There's reference to the need of grounding research and evidence to what the real needs and questions of people are. So, trying to anchor your research to that is certainly beneficial, and it takes some, again, energy and creating some space for it, creating some also mental space for it, but I think it's really worth it.
Thank you, Marco. I think this answer probably also covered the other questions also, as very similar as Rahul asked here. So So I think we now have 2 questions left. We only have less than 10 minutes, so hopefully we'll cover that. So we have a participant ask, saying, I'm really interested to know if Marco and his colleagues in WHO have been working from home and doing less traveling during the pandemic. If so, does he expect working from home and less travel to become the new normal, giving the benefits of reduced air pollution? I think in your office, and anyway, I leave that to you, Marco.
Less traveling for sure, and working from home a little. Fortunately, Korea, as you know, the response to COVID has been great in this country. So it was lockdown. Really, we didn't have full lockdown as in other countries, like my home country, for example, back in Europe. We could we reduced a lot. I mean, we had a bit of working from home, but for example, our office remained always open. So myself, another colleague, we almost always were able to come to work. We took turns with others to work from home, especially because you know, to avoid maybe using public transport in rush hours and so on. So we had a bit of that, but not much. Yes, certainly the less travel translates into less emissions, so that's good. There's also, of course, a price to pay because it's been let's face it, it's been a very long and heavy year for many of us. And of course, you know, I was personally lucky enough to not to have direct impacts from COVID, but I think we all know people who were affected, and you know, it's been a really bad year for many people we know, both professionally and out of the profession. So yeah, I think the new normal, things will not go back to what they were. By the way, this reminds me that I also want to recommend a WHO publication by Headquarters called Manifesto for a Healthy Recovery from COVID, Health and Green Recovery from COVID. It's a very nice short document where this issue of going back to a new normal is discussed in terms of environmental you know, improvements that we should really try to put in place.
Thank you, Marco. And I think now we come to the last question. And this is a really interesting one from an anonymous participant. I think this person gives you a lot of power, also responsibilities. So our participant asks you, if Marco, you were the president for the day, although they didn't say which country's president, okay, with all resources, political support, and unlimited funding available, what is the one environmental health intervention that you would like to implement, and why?
Well, I'll say the first thing that springs to mind. Without you know, it's impossible to pretend that I. So I would say stop burning fossil fuels. There will be many benefits, many co-benefits, and yes, it'll you know, we will implement instantly the NDCs, the National Determined Contributions, for greenhouse gas emissions, and lots of benefits will follow. So that's my answer, but don't quote me on that. I mean, it's, of course, many other things would be great to implement if I was the president with unlimited funding.
Thank you very much, Marco. You know, I hope that you know, a lot of presidents would hear what you have said and consider, you know, if we could even change one thing, that's already really fantastic. And obviously, a lot of environmental epidemiologists and people in other fields working together and trying to make this world much more healthier. Working together. So thank you very much, Marco, and everyone for participating in today's webinar. This is our last event in 2020, organized by the ISEE AWPC Education Committee. We hope you have enjoyed our webinar so far. My fellow committee members and I have already been thinking about some of the webinars we might run in 2021. It is shaping up to be diverse and exciting plan. This including webinar on air pollution exposure assessment and health effects, which will be hosted by Julie and Xiaowei. How to peer review a manuscript will be run by Asuko and Wei Jie. I think this will be particularly helpful for earlier career researchers. And I will organize a webinar on get published tips from editors, and as well as more career and research talks. So we look forward to you joining us in this and other webinars. If you feel they're useful, please do let us know. And also, don't forget to join the ISEE and AWPC chapter. Please see online for details. So till we next see each other, may I wish you a warm and happy end of 2020. And let's all keep our fingers crossed for a fantastic 2021. See ya.
Thank you.
Thank you.